Hi, I'm Jack Brewer with Expanding Frontiers Research, and this is the Wayward Sons book group. Thank you for joining us. Tonight, we will be exploring sections of chapters 9 and 10. Discussion topics will include Donald Keyhoe and NICAP's creative definition of the term facts, as well as similarities between the NICAP era and the organization called To the Stars Academy and much more recent goings on in the so called UFO disclosure movement. We'll also be exploring some circumstances where people try to separate other people from their money through the use of the UFO topic. So there's a lot to explore here tonight, lots of discussion to be had. Welcome to all of the panel members. Randy's here, Jeff Knox, Rachel, Stephen Long, Sharon Brown, and welcome to you, Brian, our newest group attendee. Good to see you all here. So, anything to report from the past week? Have any of you guys developed any insights into anything we discussed last week, or any field trips or activities you'd like to share with others?
Well, I just wanted to report that I saw strange lights and I made a little mini doc about it. It's very groundbreaking stuff.
A mini document, or
Mini documentary.
we can find that at UFO Sunset. Good, good.
Yeah.
Thank you. And
hmm
Rachel's
Yeah.
also been sharing on Blue Sky that she went to the beach recently, and she also shares her poetry there. She's being modest. She shares poetry after being urged by other people to share her poetry. So thanks, Rachel.
I guess so. Yeah, I also went to visit the Savi Island side ship, aka the Collins Beach UFO, which is a derelict ship there on Savi Island.
Interesting. Thank you.
She was abducted by aliens inside that UFO, and she met a man in black.
This is all true.
Brian, would you like to share anything about your interests or take on UFOs, or anything you might like to share?
Oh gosh, sure. I'll try and make it just maybe a concise about me and what brought me to the topic. So you've probably heard this a million times, but as a young kid, I had a strange sighting, and then that drew me to the weird section of the library for so many years. So yeah, I think over the since I was 11, I could recite the greatest hits of UFO lore until about a year and a half ago, where I wanted to start putting in the work of the history and like the nuance behind it. So one of I caught Professor Michael Sword's blog. That was really intriguing. And what is interesting, maddening, but also what keeps me excited is not the, it's no longer a mystery for me in terms of like everyone's got a story. There's a million possibilities of this and that out there and iterations that are all online. But in terms of like what happened in history, what were people saying and what were they doing, not just and through historical documentation, and then the context that was happening. And I think that's what really drew me to a book like this. Michael Swords obviously goes through that in quite depth, and it tells a completely different story. And I think as you spin tales and try and talk about any topic, Roswell or Foo Fighters, people divert different paths. And then when you add the context in it, it just adds six more questions that you could deep dive into. And that's, I think, what really interests me and keeps me going here. So I'm just trying to put in the work here, and I'm just about finding truth and whatever that means, and like an answer to some of the things the best that we can answer it, not just placate to my imagination. So that's me. Yeah, that's what brought me here, I suppose.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, I do relate to a lot of that. Sharon has returned. Did you want to share, Sharon?
It was last week that in normie politics world, there really was not much chatter. I've noticed a little more this past week. I have no specifics to quantify what that is, but I find it interesting when some weeks there's people posting, and not in the UFO group, but just normie world, when it shows up, and then when it goes away, it shows up and goes away.
Thank you. I noticed I was seeing some references.
Anecdotal, just observations to see.
Thank you. I noticed I was seeing in other circles, not typically UFOs, that were still trying to use the topic to some extent. I noticed they've been getting out the Project Stargate, the CIA psychic spies, they might also be called remote viewers. And they seem to be pulling that out to do another tour with it. And that's a whole subculture of men that were CIA consultants or volunteers in the remote viewing projects in the latter 20th century. And it's a whole subculture that they went on to like teach remote viewing classes and to write books and to make claims. And some of them hit the gas pretty hard on the UFO aspect of it. And one that I noticed that had been doing interviews again lately is a man named Lynn Buchanan. He's kind of loosely depicted in the movie Men Who Stare at Goats. And about 15 years ago, I exchanged emails with him for a blog post. And so that one kind of caught my attention since I had interviewed him before. And it's pretty much he's added a little more color to the stories. He, like all of them, he still leans pretty heavily, it seems to me, on that's something I can't talk about, that's classified, or as if there's some matter of integrity that he won't tell you who told him such and such and so and so. And not to be overly critical of Mr. Buchanan, just my general point is decades pass and it's just still, I'd like to tell you, but I can't, but I've got enough proof for me. And somehow we keep making content out of this stuff, basically because they were there, but they really aren't providing us anything, really, just rumors. And I think the best sources for what actually happened are probably the CIA files that were released, you know?
I was just going to say, since nobody just brought it up, the big news in UFO world this week was the government launching a website called aliens.gov, which for the last couple months, people have speculated that this is going to be where they're going to put the UFO files on. And as many of us had pretty much said from the beginning, this was going to be about illegal immigration. And of course, it turned out to be about illegal immigration. And this angered a lot of the UFO people. How dare you stigmatize our topic again with talking about illegal immigration instead of the UFO files? Very few of them were mad about the fact that they were literally dehumanizing human beings for the PR propaganda that they put out on the internet.
Yeah,
So
that
yeah.
even on, and it physically made me feel ill. It was so, because you're saying they're so foreign that it's an alien, despite the fact in the Bible, actually, immigrants were called aliens, but that was not the spirit of what was there. It was horrible.
I used to have a book actually that was called Romans and Aliens, because yeah, that's what they were called back in those days. They were called
Mhm.
aliens, and like the book had nothing to do with space aliens. It was like it was an old historical like textbook like that I had.
Stephen?
Yeah, no, I agree. That was just terrible the way that it was really dehumanizing. Um I guess I noticed that as we're approaching the summer months and we're, in the tail end of spring and into summer, it's funny that the UFO waves kind of start. It begins with the meteor showers that usually come around like March and April. And then it slowly bleeds into the summer as people start being outside more and outside at night and looking at the sky, reports skyrocket. Um, and I was going back just over like the past, say, 30 or 40 years of UFO reports on the National UFO Reporting Database. And it's just so interesting to see what happens. It at least up until I'd say the early 2000s, the most reports were definitely during June, the very beginning of summer. And it's slowly since the 2000s has kind of moved more to July, but it's just amazing to see how much more reports there are at this time of year. And of course, it coincides with things like I said, the meteor showers that come around every spring and stuff. And we've been seeing a lot of hype from that in the news recently, even so much as mysterious sonic booms and stuff. And as you dig deeper, it's just meteors typically. But that was what I noticed at least this past week.
Thank you, Steve and Jeff and Sharon. Thank you. Anything from you, Randy, in your neck of the woods or that you've observed?
I don't really have anything else to add about what's been discussed that's been in the news. I will say that I've been just continuing to read The World of Flying Saucers by Donald Keyhoe, or not Donald Keyhoe, but Donald Mizell. And it's interesting. I mean, the last part that I read was talking about the skyhook weather balloons that were classified at the time, but then became unclassified, and how we're pretty sure that at least I think one Navy pilot died chasing those. And so I don't know, interesting book. I'm continuing to read it. He did mention NICAP at one point and make a reference that he's going to talk about NICAP later in the book. So looking forward to reading that.
Yes, one of my favorite references of him and the Hillenkoetter letters that he had with the director of Central Intelligence and NICAP chairman was when he told Hillenkoetter that Congress should be investigating NICAP, not UFOs. I thought that was amusing. And I think we can relate to it more now than we might could have 10 or 20 years ago with what we've seen from To the Stars Academy and these people that get brought up to Congress to give their testimonies. I can understand the sentiment of these are the people you should be investigating, not what they're talking about. Yeah. Well, we had left off in chapter 9. I believe it's page 184 of the PDF, where it says NICAP Secretary Richard Hall. Would anyone volunteer to read to get us started?
I will, I guess.
Thank you.
All right. NICAP Secretary Richard Hall piled on the Air Force in a 1959 article in the Hartford Times titled Air Force Study Called Fiasco. Hall stated NICAP did not necessarily hold the idea that saucers are vehicles from other worlds. Someone apparently needed to make Director Keyhoe aware that was the case. Keyhoe's public statements obviously suggested otherwise. In the same article, Hall made the point that UFO data obtained by the Air Force was not available for study by the scientific community, only the conclusions in the form of fact sheets. While Hall's point is well taken, the following item, attached from a message signed by Major Keyhoe, is the type of fact sheet NICAP distributed in its literature and only preferred. The suggestion of an impending break in official UFO secret was destined to become an assertion of remarkable staying power. Its perseverance weathers in 70 years and is going strong. In more recent times, the proclamations of an intelligence community figures turned ufologist at To the Stars Academy fueled hope that UFO disclosure was upon us. The primary flag wavers have since left the organization, and the Academy appears relatively disbanded as of this writing. Among the TTSA crew was a Pentagon employee asserting he directed the UFO research program, a former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Intelligence, a defense contractor, and a veteran CIA officer, among others. The similarities to NICAP were striking. After the TTSA departures, plenty of talk persisted among them about unidentified aerial phenomenon maneuvering at excessive speeds, retrieved UFO debris, and the ever-present "it's not one of ours" theme. Actual evidence was disappointingly scarce, particularly as compared to talk that existed but was like their predecessors. This crew was also independently saying it's aliens and then chastising people for accusing them of saying it's aliens. Basically, the current and former TTSA personnel asserted they'd love to tell it, but they can't. But not to despair, they would be happy and Uncle Sam tell us what he knows and let the saucer out of the bag. A concern about the credulous acceptance of the TTSA movement was how its leaders and followers alike had tendencies to suggest the circumstances were unprecedented. The talking point was along the lines of government insiders had never before come out in such strong support of the reality of UFOs and made such commitments to bust through the wall of official secrecy. The perspective was simply not true, and those cultivating it were either poorly informed or disingenuous, either of which obviously devalues discourse. Certain aspects of TTSA were remarkably similar to NICAP, as illustrated in the image below, taken from a NICAP letter signed by Keyhoe and distributed by NICAP. The message was a staple of the organization, repeated widely. The following statement, distributed in NICAP literature, shows the long-held theme of retrieved UFO debris. As in the case of Maury Island and Dr. Olavo Fontes in Brazil, nothing substantial ever seems to come from these samples. TTSA representatives frequently discussed alleged exotic metals and UFO debris, often suggesting significant research was in progress. The narrative culminated into securing an Army contract and the rather stunning acquisition of Art's parts, a sample of material of dubious origin. The material was once provided to the late rock radio icon Art Bell by a listener with a story, and more recently kept in the care of Linda Moulton Howe. Its 2019 transition to TTSA included a $35,000 payday for Miss Moulton Howe. As of this writing, the story pretty much ended there, other than lots of questions that remain about the Army contract. Some of the most celebrated TTSA storylines involved the credit the group got for influencing politicians, such as Senator Harry Reid, Senator Marco Rubio, and former Director of National Intelligence John Ratcliffe, to openly discuss UAP. A report from the Office of the Director of National Intelligence was produced in mid-2021. A lot of hope was hung on the circumstances, particularly given there wasn't much else left to cling to about TTSA in the wake of its breakup. You shouldn't be entirely surprised to read there wasn't too much conclusively established about UFOs in the report, and further investigations would be required. Some felt the UAP report marked an intriguing change of policy by the powers that be, acknowledging a UFO reality of sorts, while at least somewhat proposing a course for future research. Others interpreted the report as less significant, failing to clarify that said phenomenon necessarily amount to anything more than incidents lacking enough data to aptly make a conclusive application, relatively prosaic circumstances. There is an enormous amount of precedence of official upper-level interest in UFOs, even if it often is ignored by many current UFO enthusiasts. Involved parties include Barry Goldwater, Gerald Ford, the Clintons, the Rockefellers, and many more. Reviews such as conducted by the Robinson Panel are not entirely uncommon by any means, and discussions of UFOs and the groups that investigate them may be found in the congressional record. Records on the overall UFO situation, as well as specific incidents and intelligence studies, have been produced by the CIA, Air Force, and other authorities, even if their thoroughness and sincerity may often be argued. We might observe about TTSA, similarly to NICAP, that is quite concerning when intelligence officials of all people seem to either not understand the problematic nature of demanding UFO disclosure, or, for whatever reason, pretend they do not. In the case of NICAP, it did not have 70 years of hindsight to draw upon. TTSA did. We might consider similar about inadequate research practices. For instance, it would seem such seasoned personnel would be keenly aware of the importance of presenting evidence for public review, as companion claims to their own faith. Intelligence officials and scientists are really uniquely qualified to understand the put up, shut up principle, and should anticipate being held accountable for providing verifiable proof in proportion to assertions. They should expect to be questioned about suppositions presented as facts. They are otherwise indistinguishable from UFO story peddlers who disingenuously target audiences who simply do not know any better. Vulnerable demographics in the UFO genre are all too eager to embrace stories that support their bias. They are historically considered advantageous targets for charlatans due to their willingness to support and defend those who tell them what they want to hear, all the while showing a near total lack of concern for verifying the claims. When less scrupulous UFO investigators avert from journalists who pose relevant, pointed inquiries, and they become defensive about an increasingly apparent lack of research integrity, it is entirely reasonable to question the value of their contributions to a body of evidence. We not only have the right, but the responsibility.
Thank you, Jeff. I appreciate you reading. A lot to unpack there, from Keyhoe's facts that he puts out that even I think mention, the saucers might be coming from Mars and things like that, to it's been an ongoing theme since NICAP that pressure is being asserted, the tipping point's here, the government's gonna spill the beans. And it's interesting, just, from a sociological perspective, it's interesting, but it's also kind of fascinating that so many people that are deeply interested in the topic seem to lack the awareness that it's been stagnant, saying it's not stagnant for like 75 years. Like and I'm among them. Like we were talking before we started recording, that I got increasingly interested in things and thought, well, let me see what this NICAP stuff is about. People say the CIA sabotaged NICAP. Since that's kind of my bag, let me see what actually happened. And man, I come to find out this is like a playbook of what To the Stars Academy did. Demand congressional hearings, get people with intelligence backgrounds, and call it unprecedented. That was a pretty amazing part of it too, that everybody kept saying, no, it's never been like this before. Any comments or thoughts, guys?
I mean, that's something that since 2017, people are always saying this has never happened before. We've never had, and like, if you've actually studied the history, it's like, yeah, it has kind of happened before. Like, this isn't the first time. Like, you just need to be aware of history. So we really have seen a repeat with TTSA, and it's like it's like they didn't learn anything in the last 70 years and are just, they tried to be NICAP all over again, basically.
And Jack, like in my book group, how it helps to have someone of an older generation to correct and say, actually, XYZ has happened before, and in some instances it's been worse, or this is better. And if you don't have people that have lived experience observing things, then it's so easy to say, oh, it's never happened before.
Yeah, and UFO people's defense, I can understand where they would kind of figure it must not be very significant, whatever happened for 75 years. If your topic of interest is what is a spacecraft, I believe they're spacecraft from another planet. I believe there must be proof of that in CIA files, in FBI files, Air Force files, and I would like to get that information. If that's your perspective, then I can understand you feeling like you really don't need to know what happened in 1960 because what you're interested in hasn't happened yet. So what difference does it make? And the difference it makes is you might learn that you need a whole new approach to the topic. And it's a tough pill to swallow. It truly is that there's never going to be any such thing as UFO disclosure because it's a flawed topic from the get-go, dare I say.
I totally agree. It's not conveying his disclosure. And to be honest, plenty of other people have said that. Even Jacques Vallée has said that. Even in recent post 2017, he said that. That people might be surprised that like the government doesn't actually know anything more than we do. Like it is true that they might have documents that they could be more transparent about that. They haven't shared with us. But are we going to find alien bodies and spaceships in what they have? Probably not. I doubt it. So the only other thing I wanted to mention was about the arts part sample that Linda Moulton Howe got $35,000 for it. I mean, that whole situation is absolutely insane because like Jacques Vallée was involved with this and tested this stuff, and I had talked to Jack back in 2011, I think, about the arts part sample, and he confirmed to me what I had mentioned to him, that I think it was just possibly slag from the Betterman Kroll process. And he's like, yeah, that's what we thought it was as well. And he had showed me test results that Hal Puthoff and stuff had done at his company back in, I think, like 2008, 2009, where they were looking to see if it was like a terahertz waveguide. And they concluded it wasn't. It was nothing. And despite knowing all that, these same characters have somehow come behind that sample again post 2017 to promote it, to the point where Linda Moulton Howe took a payday for it. An Army contract was created on it. And then all these usual suspects had already determined it was nothing well over a decade before.
Okay, so let's break this down a little. Go ahead, Rachel.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't follow what Jeff was saying. You're distracted. Go ahead.
Well, hold your thought. We'll come back to it.
Okay.
Have I got this reasonably correct? Back in the day, there was Art Bell's radio show. He's done various incarnations of Coast to Coast or Midnight in the Desert, Robert Bigelow ties, but that's a whole nother topic for another time. And part of the late night shtick is you end up with a cast of characters that call you, and they may claim to work at Area 51 and that they're trying to break out and they've got to go because they're being attacked, and they'll scream and act like it's wild. And this is just what the radio show is. There's somebody that's saying they were abducted last night and what happened, but they can't tell you who they are. And like, this is just what they do on the show. And do I understand correctly? One of Art's callers said he had material from a UFO. He sent, or Art received a box of material that was supposedly what this caller had been claiming to have. And it was dubbed Art's Parts. As Art got on in years, he gave it to Linda Moulton Howe, who is a rather sensational UFO researcher, but has enjoyed some degree of popularity and respect from time to time. Linda Moulton Howe took this box of stuff and sold it to Tom DeLonge and To the Stars Academy for $35,000. Tom had, and To the Stars had a contract with the U.S. Army to test various metamaterials that have a lot of different definitions. He supposedly gave it to them for that, while he was telling people to donate and invest in the organization, but all your money's gone. It didn't work out, and nothing ever became of the test. Is that, do I have that about right?
Yeah, that sounds about right. I think we heard something about the Crowded test like in the last year or two, maybe from Blackfall, got some documents, but I think there's nothing relevant, like, it was not some amazing metamaterial or anything of that nature. And I mean, that was to be expected, because when Linda Moulton Howe took possession of the samples, she actually gave them to this other scientist guy to analyze them. And this was in the late 90s. And he told her the same. Not only did he say there's nothing to this, he actually recreated some himself. Now, this sample was basically layers of magnesium and bismuth and these kind of thin layers. And there was no real like structure to it. Like, it kind of looked like something that was just kind of like created haphazardly. And so her scientist was able to use a process called vapor deposition to create it himself in his home lab, like he had like a garage lab or something. And so he was able to make some as well. But Linda Moulton Howe didn't like that answer. She didn't like that it was like not amazing. And so she kind of just ignored, what her expert told her. There's a guy that runs a website called the UFO Watchdog, Reese, and he has a sample that her expert created in his own lab. That's pretty much identical to the Art's Parts. And so the crazy thing is that he saw this diagram, and they'd known, almost 2 decades at that point that there was nothing to the sample. I mean, it just seems fraudulent, like all the way through and through.
Yeah, that's the wildest part, right? Like Linda Howe had it tested. It came back as man-made slag or whatever. And like you said, the results were just ignored. She didn't present them to her audience, right? And then come a decade or two later, TTSA ends up buying them from her. They do the same thing. They enter into this credit agreement with the Army. And then we just never, they pump it and, we're going to share the results and blah, blah, blah. We're going to build a spaceship with it. And then we just never hear anything about the results, right? Just like Linda, they hid the results essentially and ignored them. And yeah, like tons of researchers, including John Greenwald at the Black Vault, reached out to TTSA and tried to get answers on that, because we could see through the fiscal reports that the cradle was completed and done. TTSA never replied, right? And the Army, when they were asked, replied that, hey, it's TTSA's property. We can't release the results. They can. Now, I think Arrow, if I'm not mistaken, did release some comments on the Creta. I think they might have said it was a missile casing, but I don't recall seeing that there was any evidence presented with that. But if I'm not mistaken, that was in an initial Arrow report in
The
volume 1.
the Army footed the bill for it. It was $750,000 to destroy it and check it out. They did that at the Michigan Michiganders, the tank facility here. So
Ouch.
that's where the test was done. So you know, Stephen, we talked about this, and we asked about, we were talking like, did TTSA ever like RFP the government, right? Because the next step when these organizations happen is like, what's the enterprising aspect of it? I think that's maybe the only difference between what we're seeing with TTSA and the Keyhoe era is there's an enterprising ask. It's like, what's the next thing that's happening? What are you setting up? Is it a technology thing that can help you spy for, you know, I'll set up an organization that can help you find those drones. I can, you know, there's some kind of proposal out there. They never did that, but the only thing that they did do was the Army said, yeah, we'll pay for it and we'll check it out. And pretty embarrassing why it didn't come out, you know.
Yeah, it is. I agree. I agree. Like that's the fundamental aspects of that are lacking from a UFO culture that makes it an attractive target for charlatans. Is it often just wants to be told what it wants to hear, and won't ask the follow-up questions, or won't expect sources and verification and things like that.
It's just amazing how often the so-called UFO, when we have physical debris, physical evidence, it turns out to be literal slag that's a leftover from some industrial process. And like, you may wonder how you get layered magnesium and bismuth like from an industrial process. Well, that Betterman Kroll thing I mentioned is a process where you're purifying lead. You're trying to remove the bismuth from the lead, and they use magnesium to remove the bismuth from the lead, and you end up with layers of magnesium and bismuth, and a layer like that on the edge of like the, you know, the refinery equipment or whatever. And so it's just this wild that pretty much every UFO debris case I have looked at has been slag from an industrial process.
Yeah, I think Rachel had said no more of that. Yeah, like what this has to do with NICAP is that similarity that Keyhoe was writing in the late 1950s and the early 1960s about UFO debris, and it's promising and it's being tested, and to his mind there's conclusive evidence, and it's like the same thing, you know. But as Brian aptly points out, they've upgraded it a certain extent now. The intelligence community, as well as the participants in the narrative, have upgraded the stakes and upgraded what they hope to gain out of it. Rachel, did you have something?
Yeah, I was just going to say about the topic of disclosure, that it's kind of ironic too, because there is so many things that the government does cover up, you know, and that, you know, there's so many records that we know exist that are not public at all. And this whole UFO disclosure is kind of a I think it's very useful as a red herring.
That's certainly an argument to be made, no doubt about that.
It's just so stark. Like, these are the people that are banging the drum endlessly about transparency and disclosure. And yet, time and time again, they don't practice these things.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I know. I think I said last week that it's absolutely outrageous for an organization that NICAP that was soliciting intelligence officers for information, in essence, trying to infiltrate intelligence agencies, that cried foul that intelligence agencies were infiltrating its organization. It's just outrageous. I mean, it is like, it's like the ultimate in circular logic, you know, and rationalizing. And as I qualified last week, I'm by no means a flag waver of CIA and FBI improprieties. I mean, there's plenty that they can be criticized about, but it kind of reminds me of back when I was writing the blog, The UFO Trail, and I did a blog post about how my web traffic, I could see the different, you used to be able to track the web signatures of where your views were coming from. It's a lot more complicated now, but it used to be fairly easy. And I could see, you know, traffic coming from certain intelligence agencies that they apparently read the UFO Trail. And what was kind of funny about it is I could see that, like, after one of them read it, then a few would, as if they were passing it around or something. And some other UFO blogs told me they had seen similar. And this one person in the comments that read my blog regularly said something to the effect of, well, God, I hope somebody's keeping an eye on what these people are doing, because it was like, you know, they should be monitoring what some of the things these people say. Yeah, there's an argument to be made. Their activities should be monitored. Yeah. This conversation kind of reminds me of that.
I wanted to add something too that was shocking about your book was the amount of interpersonal connections people had. So the question you had about is the CIA monkeying around, but like every time I read who was brought in, it was like, oh, an old boy from the academy joining, and that happens often. It's always a peer. I thought that, you know, no insight there, but I think that's just it was shocking to me that like people were brought along and they have a connection and they kind of roll with it almost like they're like a LARP. I don't know what it is. Like you're jiving and playing jazz with someone that you're comfortable with, and sure, I'll help you out with that thing that's on the news and popular. Let's do that. It seems to repeat itself, and I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, I did too. And I don't really have explanations for it still, other than I feel pretty confident it's not all coincidental. Yeah. Did you have something else, Rachel?
Yeah, I was just gonna say I don't know the word for that, but or it's like escaping my mind, but I feel like I see that a lot too in a lot of other places, um, where like for example you have like the liars clubs, and, you know, like earlier on and around the turn of the 19th, 20th century, where a lot of people would be prominent members of the community and kind of things like that. So it would make sense, for example, for a newspaper to publish this story with like an affidavit and being like, this man swears up and down this happened and he's the respected mayor or whatever, like the sheriff, you know, kind of thing. And like, and it's, you know, because people working for the newspaper are in the same club or fraternity, um, um, that kind of thing.
Interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, that's all I have to say.
I just wanted to share one thing. It's slightly off topic, but you showed Jack, that one of the screenshots you showed was some numbered points. The headline is Facts About NICAP and the UFO Problem. And number 4 was something about the moon bridge. Dr. H. Percy Wilkins, noted lunar expert. I never heard about that. So I looked that up to see what the deal was. And there was much ado about nothing. So it sounds like an amateur astronomer thought he had detected a naturally forming bridge on the moon, but it's quickly determined it wasn't. But I did want to share one link with the group because I found that in 2010, the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter actually did detect a naturally occurring bridge on the moon. And it's kind of awesome. And there's a link to the image there if you're interested.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll include that in the video description on YouTube. You can also find links to other resources we reference, websites and online records you can find in the YouTube description. So thank you, Randy.
Yeah, it was just a fun little discovery.
Who would like to finish up chapter 9 for us on the bottom of page 189 of the PDF, Hoover and the Bureau?
I'll do it, I guess.
Thank you.
Okay. Hoover and the Bureau may have held fast to a public policy of neutrality towards NICAP, but by 1961, internal reports revealed a much more decisive view. Information was compiled for the New Orleans field office after a clerk inquired whether there would be any objection to becoming active in NICAP. The resulting FBI report frowned upon the NICAP attack on the Air Force and criticized Keyhoe's writing. Quote, a number of former United States military officers have been affiliated with the NICAP, unquote, the document continued. And Keyhoe has openly attempted to capitalize upon their names and military titles. The Bureau has been most cautious in handling correspondence from the NICAP to avoid any inference that we hold views, either favorable or unfavorable to this organization. As the above information regarding Donald Keyhoe and the NICAP reflects, the NICAP is not the type of organization with which the Bureau's name should become connected, either through membership of FBI employees in the NICAP or by any other means, unquote. It is for such reasons I find it difficult to accept without question that intelligence professionals decide to get involved with UFO organizations, sometimes deeply so, in strictly recreational capacities. It often just doesn't make sense for a number of reasons. Meanwhile, members of the public persisted in writing Hoover and requesting guidance on NICAP. In 1962, a high school student expressing concern about communism and interest in propaganda posed a question to the FBI director. The young man wanted to know if Hoover thought NICAP was either inspired or influenced by communism. Hoover diplomatically explained in response, the FBI was strictly an investigative agency of the federal government and did not provide evaluations on organizations. He soon added, quote, perhaps you will like to refer to my books, Masters of Deceit and a Study of Communism, unquote.
Thank you, Rachel. Yes, here is that letter from Hoover, a copy of it to the young man, where he says he won't issue an opinion on NICAP, but read my book, Masters of Deceit. I found that amusing. And the part about the FBI clerk that wanted to, thought NICAP was interesting, but wanted to make sure it wouldn't be a conflict of interest. And it went all the way to Hoover's office, for him to say, no, we don't want to do that. I think that gives us an example of how extraordinary it is that, like admirals in the Navy, we're supposed to believe are just moonlighting as UFO investigators. I just don't buy it, and I don't think we'll ever find a smoking document that says here's what they were doing in NICAP, here's what they were doing in South America with the guy that found the slag in the lake, you know. But I don't think there will be a smoking document like that. But there's some that are pretty indicative, like the one we've already reviewed about the 1954 coup in Guatemala that involved a lot of these intelligence officers or their contacts that told their assets in Guatemala to consider a UFO hoax as a distraction. I just don't think that, you know, Tanner and I were discussing it recently too in an episode, that certainly these men at the higher levels of clearance that sat on presidential advisory committees and were directors and assistant directors of entire intelligence agencies were well aware of the vetting process. And I just don't think they would have been getting involved in something that they thought was going to harm that professional reputation. I just don't think they would have, which you know, to be as clear as possible, I'm suggesting it was a professional capacity that they were involved.
I mean, recreational is kind of a funny word too, because like I feel like some of these guys might engage in things like counterintelligence and like you know, psychological crap, like just for fun. Like I know I feel like people have suggested that a lot about Richard Doty, you know, that he wasn't you know, that he was kind of acting on his own, you know, and I could imagine someone like that just being like, oh, well, I'm just going to do this for fun just to see what sorts of things I can manipulate.
Yeah, I think there might be a wide leeway there too, that I think that the UFO community often has a misguided impression of what it might be like to be a CIA asset. And I think it's my experience from interacting with UFO enthusiasts that's the case. And it would be based on the research I've done into the UFO community, not direct experience, that I would make that assessment. And it's my assessment that in the UFO community, we base our suspicions or even our emotions get conditioned from watching movies, you know, what we see in the movies, what we read in books, you know, Whitley Strieber, Bud Hopkins, whatever the case may be. And I think there's some incorrect supposition that like an FBI agent meets someone at a Denny's and shows them a badge and tells them what he'll offer them for what they're going to do. And then they're going to negotiate a contract with health insurance or something. And I don't envision it's, you know, based on my research, that's not how it works at all. There's like stages that they go through, that the first would be a targeted asset is influenced to behave in the way they want them to behave without ever being informed they were influenced by the FBI. Like that would be the first approach. Then if that isn't successful or more is needed, a handler would approach them and try to persuade them to do certain things that the targeted person probably doesn't know the handler is an FBI asset. And so on and so forth through a series of things until it becomes, as the letter we reviewed on Donald Menzel, that an FBI agent is seeking permission to actually approach a scientist and tell them they want them to act on their behalf. And even then, it's going to be because you're a patriot, because of this, because of that. And it's my understanding that, like, in many circumstances, it will even be to try to persuade someone to avoid negative circumstances. It's not like positive reinforcement. And so, yeah, Rachel, I think you're on the right track there too, that people that are in those capacities to be making those decisions, to be making those judgments, would have a lot of leeway of claiming they were just working on a case and they were trying to see what this person would do and what that person would do. And perhaps Doty felt like he could argue that he was just trying to influence Linda Moulton Howe was why, like he wasn't necessarily told at point blank directly, give her these documents and tell her that this happened. Yeah, I think it gets real muddy and real murky. Yes.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree that it's like it's a really great way of laundering kind of what you're doing or what a group of people is doing even.
Yeah, and then it's my interpretation from reading records and released documents that once an asset knows it's in a situation that it's kind of getting protected to some extent, that it's part of an investigation or a law enforcement investigation, then that asset might have a lot of leeway in how they profit from it. Like we're not paying you, but you need to figure out how you can make a living and make money at infiltrating this organization, at being an informant on gun runners or whatever the circumstance may be. And yes, I think that it does get real murky. I think it's often misunderstood and glamorized when it really doesn't deserve that kind of celebration, for lack of a better term. Any related thoughts?
Yeah, I like how, and again, because like including myself, there's a lot of misunderstanding, right, about intelligence officers and operatives and just how they work. And I remember years ago I had heard you say, you pointed out that the intelligence agencies have a pretty well defined history of allowing their operatives to practice capitalism and create create profit in furtherance of their goals, right? And it certainly is something to think about, right?
Yeah, it is. It is.
And also the how far, I'm trying to think of how to word it, but like as far as the ops and the goals of whatever is going on, the deceptions and the things that the UFO topic is being, say, used for from time to time typically are so far removed from the UFO genre, right? And it's often, being used in furtherance of things that we would never even guess if we had a million guesses, right? And it's just funny when we think about guys like the gentleman who was a member of NICAP and was the man who was responsible for choosing agents for foreign service in the CIA. And it really begs the question, like, is this really just his after work hobby?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think it's ridiculous. Yeah, I do. I think there's an argument to be made that, okay, well, it is Washington. I mean, you can't swing a dead rat without hitting somebody that's pensioned from some agency or other. But that only goes so far. Yeah, yeah, I mean, Thomas O'Keefe was an incorporator of NICAP with council services and sat on a board that selected State Department / CIA employees for foreign service. That would be spies, people that work at foreign embassies or service, and was designated in the NICAP Council Services contract to be someone who could select NICAP regional directors at his discretion. Yeah, like that is ridiculous to me, to think that's not related to some type of other agenda. I think it's pretty brilliant, in a manner of speaking, too, that they would use UFOs as now, is it possible that all these people were just retired from their government positions and they worked with council services to pick up some money on the side? Colonel Amos, Thomas O'Keefe, Mary Von King, all these people just, were supplementing their income, getting contracts from the Economic Cooperation Administration, which was shown to be a CIA asset. Yeah, I guess. I can't prove it's not, but it sure would seem like a missed opportunity to the CIA to me too. Like let's just say the CIA always had the option to give these folks a call when they wanted. And, like the woman was joking in the comments of my blog that time, we've talked about this too. If the CIA and the FBI weren't investigating who is leaking records to UFO investigators, they weren't doing their job. Now, the part like Brian brought up of these different good old boys that everybody knew everybody and all of that, again, I don't have an explanation for. So why did the CIA start the organization to then have Keyhoe do what he did, or at least allow him to do what he did all that time before they shut him down in 1969? I don't have an explanation for that. Again, I don't think it was coincidental. I think that they had a tight finger on the pulse of what Keyhoe was doing. I think they were interested in who was leaking in documents, what the documents were about, what their personnel was interpreting was going on that they thought they should tell Donald Keyhoe. How read into it was Keyhoe? Did he know all along? I don't know. I don't know. I tend to doubt it, but I don't know. Any other comments, or shall we go on to chapter 10? Any volunteers to read?
Sure, I can.
Thank you.
Chapter 10, Keyhoe Years. Whatever culmination of events may specifically have contributed to the formation of NICAP, Donald Keyhoe at least seemed to be flying solo, independent of intelligence agency influence in daily operations. He was assisted by a cast, significant members of which included, but were not limited to, Richard Hall, Gordon Lohr, Isabel Davis, Ann Druffel, Ted Blocher, Don Berliner, and Larry Bryant. Many who contributed at NICAP became higher profile members of future UFO organizations and the UFO research community at large. For all of its faults and questionable motives, NICAP was quite effective in some areas. Keyhoe and his closest allies were committed to certain standards of evidence, even if their methods of applying those standards might have been called into doubt at times. NICAP frequently made a point of criticizing aspects of the UFO circus it felt devalued the topic. Circumstances and people involved in such devaluing, Keyhoe reasoned, made it all the more difficult to accomplish getting the subject of UFOs taken seriously. NICAP committed itself to calling out those who tried to capitalize on the UFO topic through questionable means, a policy largely abandoned by future UFO organizations and to the detriment of the genre. To be clear, many UFO organizations and high-profile researchers became shameless enablers of poor investigative practices and sensational yet unverified tales. The most widely accepted reasons for such tactics is those tales put butts in seats. Little concern is typically given to the damage sustained to the credibility of an organization, the genre as a whole, or the consumers. UFO writers and similar such individuals who rely on popularity for livelihood are often extremely hesitant to critically examine any story being embraced by their targeted audience. They would often much rather ride coattails than implement professional research standards. Likewise, they frequently refuse to acknowledge scientific findings that contradicted cherished beliefs, such as those pertaining to memory fallibility, the unreliability of witness testimony, and even forensics research which could be implemented in some instances. Such common practices might be considered particularly hypocritical and self-defeating, given the genre's disingenuous, long-standing claim to strive for acceptance from the scientific community. Among those criticized by Keyhoe were contactees, a demographic who claimed to interact with flying saucer occupants from other worlds. Keyhoe floated the idea contactees should be administered lie detector tests facilitated by NICAP. He was likewise outspoken against charlatans who incorporated UFOs into their scams. Keyhoe took the opportunity in 1957 to write a letter of congratulations to FBI Director Hoover when a Bureau investigation resulted in just such an arrest. The accused had used a UFO story as a tool to swindle a woman out of $38 grand. Calculating inflation, that would currently be over $360,000. From an ensuing article. Following up the FBI arrest of Harold J. Berney, 59-year-old ex-convict, for a trip to Venus swindle in Washington, D.C., the National Investigations Committee has congratulated FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover for exposing the fraud and has offered its full cooperation in securing evidence of other false UFO claims. One of our purposes, NICAP wrote Director Hoover, is to turn the spotlight on such fraudulent claims, whether made for personal gain, publicity, or other reasons. Acting for the board and the members of NICAP, I should like to congratulate you and the Federal Bureau of Investigation for your public exposure of this case. Berney was arrested in Alabama on charges of swindling Pauline E. Goebel, Washington, D.C., out of $38,000 in an alleged scheme to set up communications between Venus and the Earth. Berney's arrest followed his attempt to sell a book manuscript in which he had related a dramatic story of visits to Venus. According to Berney, he was picked up by a flying saucer which landed in Texas with 2 frozen bodies inside. After transferring to a larger ship, the story ran, Berney reached Venus where he learned advanced sciences and cultures. During his stay, Berney said, he was chosen to be an Earth agent for Venus, specifically to set up a communication system. A publisher to whom Berney submitted the manuscript tipped off Washington police, and Detective Sergeant Millard Dixon uncovered some interesting facts which brought in the FBI. After producing a new type of antenna, Berney had set up a Delaware company he called the Telewand Corporation. Miss Goebel and another backer financed the operation, according to the FBI, including the trips to Venus, which Berney reported. Later, a package reached the backers, supposedly from a Venusian comrade of Berney's named Eucellus. Inside were Berney's camera, his credentials, pictures of his family, and about $300 in cash. Along with these was a message saying that Berney had died on Venus. A check on Berney's record, according to the FBI, disclosed that he had served 2 years for selling watered stocks in Michigan, 8 years for violating postal regulations in West Virginia, and 5 years on another charge in Florida. Following Berney's trail from Eagle Pass, Texas, where the package had been mailed, the FBI located him working as a sign painter in Pritchard, Alabama, where the arrest took place. The article went on to explain Hoover diplomatically stated to Keyhoe in a June 6, 1957 response, I have received your letter of May 29, 1957, concerning our activities in the trip to Venus case, and I want to thank you for your thoughtful congratulations.
Thank you, Randy. I appreciate it. Any thoughts on that or anything it reminds you of or related notions?
When they arrested Harold Jesse Berney, the newspaper headline said, "Man from Venus nabbed by FBI." There's this picture of him, and he just kind of like
Yeah, a sign painter, I guess what he was, that told the lady he was studying finer arts and culture, science and arts or whatever. It's sad that sometimes we want to believe so much that will put that kind of faith in something and that kind of investment, like the investment almost will give it credibility, like trying to buy the truth in a certain way is concerning. And you never know what's to be read between the lines here either. Like, is this a woman that like was she getting elderly, or was this like a lonely heart situation, or what else is to be made of it? But it's certainly nothing new for Linda Moulton Howe to come up with a $35,000 price tag as compared to what's been going on for decades. And I'm not suggesting that what Linda did was necessarily like what was in the FBI fraud case. It's just a lot of money for Art's parts, and certainly seems within the realm of being open to question.
It also reminds me of like Joe Firmage and past swindles with him, and just TTSA and their larger swindle of their fans and fellow believers when they were going for multiple stock releases.
Yeah.
Stock offerings.
I just gleaned something off Keyhoe in his character that he seemed to be kind of like a junkyard dog. Like he was driven, and he had a mission, and he always did prior to NICAP too. And the fact that he had like these standards, not the evidence standards that was discussed, but like it's gonna be nuts and bolts, and it's gonna follow this um, determination I've made. Like I'm gonna solve the puzzle I've come out to set. I just kind of it speaks to his character that he was a man on a mission, and him reaching out to the FBI to be like, you know, this is to be handled or congratulated, and these aren't to my standards and my liking. Speaks a lot about him.
Yeah, I thought so too. Yeah.
It looks like Pauline Goebel was in her 50s when this happened. She had already lost 4 husbands by the time this guy was arrested in 57, but she lived another 40 years until 1997. So
Thank you.
age.
She was a Black Widow, huh?
She had a total of 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Her gravestone has her 6 departed husbands on it. Yeah.
That would be an interesting project, wouldn't it? Like Clara John and different eccentric women of ufology.
Yeah, I just like thinking here, like I wonder how that affected her interest in the topic, or her belief, or how she continued with that for 40 years. She kind of just leave it behind, you know.
Well, and it's an obscene amount of money particularly for a secretary. So she must have either had family money or inherited money from these deceased husbands, or I don't know where she got it from, but that's a huge sum of cash.
Yeah, it is. It is. And how does it affect her view of the topic? I think that's a really good question, Steve. I had said, a week or two ago that kind of a disclaimer that by researching NICAP and then having what NICAP supporters feel would be a negative view of NICAP and its quality of research by and large, I clarified that really doesn't have anything to do with UFOs per se. That I'm not trying to tell anyone what they saw, what they experienced. I don't know. Is there still more phenomena to be discovered that we don't fully know about, the science community doesn't yet fully understand? I'm certain there is. Does it have anything to do with UFOs? I don't know. I think Mick West makes a really good argument that a lot of UFOs would be explained with adequate information. That's an argument that's been made long before Mick, but I think that he words it well with that low information zone. I think is a really good term there. So it can seem like we're just debunking and we're being negative, but I mean, it has to be acknowledged, right? That there's people that are coming for your money if you'll throw it at UFOs. Like, don't we have to go through this stuff?
Yeah, and again, the point you make is that this doesn't mean that it has to also affect or define your experience, if you had one, or any other experience in the topic, right? Every situation sighting and report and cases should be judged on its own merits, right? And on its own evidence. But there's such a personal level that a lot of us are here on, that it's really uncomfortable to do that, right? And to scrutinize those things and to acknowledge the debunks or the inconsistencies. And really, as about 95% of all UFO reports have turned out historically to have prosaic explanations, and the remainder simply just don't have enough evidence to properly investigate them. The proper default position should be that any given UFO is debunkable, right? And again, that doesn't mean that your UFO is necessarily debunkable, right? But just to objectively assess everything on its own merits.
Yeah, like when we were considering the MJ12 documents, and I was kind of laughing with Sharon about how someone like Sharon that's not steeped in UFO lore wouldn't find it shocking at all that they're likely fraudulent records, because that would be her default setting. She'd like figure they are till someone proves otherwise, which would be the rational take, rather than just always figuring it's true. How are they going to debunk it this time? Yeah, yeah.
One of the passages that I read, you mentioned just the phrase, what was it? The unreliability of witness testimony. So I can't help but mention the book, The Reliability of UFO Witness Testimony, which is a collection of academic essays. I'm sure it's nothing new to people in this group, but I was kind of floored by a lot of what it talked about and just how unreliable witness testimony is. And I was going to paste a link to that. There's a
Please
free ebook you
do,
can
and
get about
I'll include relevant links in the show description on the YouTube channel. And now might be a good time to mention, if you would like to participate in the Zoom calls, you will find my email address in the YouTube show description as well. Just reach out to me at jackbrewerblog@yahoo.com, and I will provide you a free PDF of Wayward Sons, NICAP, and the IC, and include you on the e-list for Zoom invitations for future meetings. We record on Wednesday nights Eastern Time, and are always welcoming more thoughtful and intelligent discussion. So if you think you'd be a good fit, please reach out. Along those lines, Randy, I was sincerely interested in this topic. So I read things like Julia Shaw's work on memory, Dr. Julia Shaw, that's just fascinating, about clinical studies of how memories can be molded with certain techniques, and the things people will believe after being shown that you're misremembering, like being given conclusive information that it happened this way, and they'll tend to stick harder to the incorrect memory. Dr. Elizabeth Loftus has a lot of good stuff. There are some counter arguments for some of their perspectives. Without going too far into it, I'll just say psychologists with clinical trials are pretty strong evidence. When somebody can show me the alien, as Tim Banal says, I'll take a hard look at the alien, you know.
Yeah, the reliability of eyewitness testimony, or of witness testimony, reliability of UFO witness testimony. Jeff and I were doing a book group on that a long time ago that is defunct now, but it's a pretty good book because it also talks a lot about a lot of perceptual things that can cause people to misinterpret things in the sky. Yeah, I think it's a really good book. You know, I have like criticisms about it, but it's a lot of different writers contributed to it, and I think it's a great book.
Thank you.
Fantastic book, a must-read book, in my opinion. Unfortunately, I've shared the link with people before, and the kind of response you get out of like a lot of the disclosure community is like, it's a debunker book. How dare you question the reliability of eyewitness testimony? And it's like, but you have to. Even UFO researchers like Kevin Randall and people like that, have praised the book because it's important to recognize, the fallibility of eyewitness testimony. It's just a fact. And if you're not aware of the various issues and factors that can come into play, then you're gonna mistakenly, you're not gonna be able to properly analyze the UFO case and what might have happened in that situation.
Yeah, I just want to add, yeah, I do think it is essential. Yeah. I was understating my case for the book.
Thank you, guys. I was at a regional MUFON meeting one time of a Central Florida chapter, and a woman was presenting information on identifiable flying objects, and people left in anger. They were caustic towards her about, I didn't come here to hear about what's identifiable. And I felt like, wow, there's a lot to be said between the lines here. Which kind of brings me to another point of back in the day, like when NICAP was in its heyday, they were the main game, which if you were a writer like Ann Druffel, a researcher like Isabel Davis, if you wanted to get plugged in and you wanted to have the contacts and you wanted to be in the loop, I think you pretty much needed to be involved with NICAP. And I can kind of relate to that because like in the 90s and the early part of this century, the Mutual UFO Network was pretty much the main game in the UFO community. And I could meet people that I otherwise would not have met. I met filmmakers, I met people to interview, I met people that had interviewed people I wanted to interview that could then be a point of contact for me by hanging out at MUFON meetings. And you also could go to the symposiums or the state meetings, if not the national meetings, and you would gain access to researchers and experiencers and people that you otherwise wouldn't. And that was, pre-internet that made it to where now if you just, go on YouTube, you can see their videos for years, more than you can ever get to. But I just thought that like Brian was talking earlier about how much context matters. Yeah, like you need to know, why were some people even involved with MUFON or with NICAP? Well, they didn't have an internet. Like context matters. It really does. Yeah.
I would be interested in seeing that identifiable flying object presentation you mentioned. Do you happen to know if it's on YouTube?
It is not. It was
Mm.
in the back of a bagel shop outside Orlando, where we used to meet. And yeah, I would meet various people of interest that I might have read about in books or seen on documentaries, things like that. And I found it interesting. They talked about the way the eyes can, play tricks on you, optical illusions, and how at different heights it can be different too. Like on a mountain in thinner air, things may look differently than they do in a city in smog and things like that. And they were giving examples of how that could be. Aerial Phenomena Investigations, API, their website has some pretty good stuff on identifiable flying objects and things that are often misidentified or could direct you to some of it. API, they're on Blue Sky as well as they have a website.
All right, thanks.
It's just it really hits the nail on the head, and we hear it all the time today in a topic that we just said, where 95% of the UFO reports are proven to have prosaic explanations. It really drives the point home when people say, well, I don't care about the identifieds, I'm here for the unidentifieds. It's just, they're like, it just blows the mind, really.
But you've got to be able to know what the unidentifieds are. I mean, what the identifieds are to know if it's unidentified or not. Like, you've got to have that like base knowledge in like the first place. I would just also recommend, if you don't have a copy of Alan Hendry's book, The UFO Handbook. Alan Hendry was the main in charge of investigations for the Center for UFO Studies, Hynek's Center for UFO Studies. And it's almost entirely a book about like IFOs and like how people make mistakes with UFO sightings. So much so he left the topic. I guess kind of got disconcerted with how badly people were at identifying things in the sky. And if I believe you might be able to find it on Internet Archive. If not, let me know. I have a PDF of it I can send people.
Another point I'd like to bring up, which is something that I say a lot, that I've made this argument before, that is that you can't really understand what an unidentified flying object is like unless you look at what other flying objects are like how they behave, what they'll look like, and how instruments will pick them up and stuff like that. And I think too, when I was going to this bike trip, I noticed that there was lots of birds, there was lots of fluff in the air, lots of really cool butterflies and dragonflies all over the place. And these things are fascinating. Like every single one of those things are fascinating. And I think it's worthwhile to have a curious mind about all of those different kinds of things about the natural world. And if UFOs exist, then they exist in the natural world, and they're going to be like other natural things.
Good points. Good points.
Yeah, very well said, Rachel.
Thanks, Randy.
Everything's a UFO to people that are bad at identifying things in the sky, right?
Which it turns out is like all of us, really, especially depending on what that object is.
Yes.
And, we may have mentioned it before, but, pilots are routinely touted as, expert witnesses. But time and time again, studies have shown that they rank among the worst class of witnesses for all kinds of understandable reasons, including the speed that they're traveling and the amount of instruments that they have to pay attention to and the brief moment that they have to look at something compared to someone who's just standing on the ground with nothing else distracting their attention. And Yeah, even J. Allen Hynek has cited that pilots routinely have tested into the worst class of witness. I think he said that in one particular study, commercial pilots had an 89% misperception rate, and military pilots had an 88% misperception rate.
Wow. Yeah, I remember reading about that Hynek, an outspoken UFO advocate, was one of the first that said, the data just doesn't support that pilots as trained observers, that like they're among the worst. Yeah.
Not to mention, who could possibly be an expert observer of an unknown, something that's not known? How could you be an expert at it? They may be an
Right.
expert at they're trained on viewing and identifying specific types of aircraft, not things that they don't even know what it is.
Right. Right.
Well, I'm a what's it expert, and I can say that you have a distinction between unknowns and what's it's. So I can't speak to the unknowns per se, but what's it's. Well, I don't know what those are either. So
They're not
Would
the-
anyone like to volunteer to read the next section? We'll do one more section.
Yeah, I'd be happy to read.
Thank
Pull it up
you.
here. One of the more fabled Keyhoe incidents involved his January 22nd, 1958 live CBS television appearance on the Armstrong Circle Theater. His microphone was cut during the program as he asserted a congressional committee was examining evidence that would prove UFOs were machines under intelligent control. Resulting accusations of conspiracies and censorship thrived. The CBS director of editing countered that the program was carefully reviewed for security reasons. Statements to be made by Keyhoe on the show were reportedly cleared beforehand with the Air Force by the network, and Keyhoe was seemingly silenced when he deviated from the script. Keyhoe's point of view on the matter, as expressed in his subsequent letter, apparently distributed by NICAP to its mailing list. It's not difficult to understand Major Keyhoe's perspective. That stated, his assumptions and preferred conclusions are reflected in his numbered points. He suggests a secret conclusion was reached that flying saucers were real. Secret documents concluded UFOs were interplanetary spaceships, and he strongly implied that the 1953 Robertson panel advocated some kind of a UFO disclosure policy. Those claims are not entirely incorrect in all instances, not exactly, but they are certainly not accurate either. Keyhoe often alluded to information contained in some select reports, but took great liberty with context. I tend to think such discrepancies were typically due to the Major's overwhelming desire to believe his suspicions were correct, combined with a certain amount of hearsay and similar dynamics that muddied the proverbial waters. I suspect that to be the case as compared to intentional distortion of the circumstances, but I of course do not conclusively know what drove Donald Keyhoe. I just tend to think the Major succumbed to motivated reasoning, and he was clearly immersed in personal grudges. It's not difficult to envision he had a lot of emotionally vested. It was not difficult to envision he had a lot of emotionally vested in chasing his white whale. As Keyhoe indicated, there were in fact some reports associated with Project Sign and Grudge that suggested the possibility some UFOs could be interplanetary spacecraft. The conjecture was obviously not conclusive. Moreover, we know that the Robertson panel collectively concluded the biggest threat from UFOs was related to propaganda, and the panel found that the UFO evidence presented was unconvincing. Keyhoe's incorrect supposition foreshadowed use of a tactic destined to characterize certain questionable researchers and which would ultimately haunt truth seekers for decades to come. As long as a claim could not be falsified, it was thoroughly promoted for maximum benefit. As this related to government reports and eventual FOIA researchers, the proverbial smoking gun document was perpetually believed, or at least claimed to be believed, to be just around the corner. It was speculated the Robertson panel report would tell all, but when it did not, This was suspected surely to be due to a carefully orchestrated cover-up. The pursuit was then on to the next cache of documents promoted as the ones they didn't want us to see. It was then fair game to purport the highly sought-after docs would reveal most anything anybody felt like speculating, at least until it was conclusively discovered that they did not. The process would then repeat. Many researchers were so certain their suspicions were correct that it didn't seem to ever occur to them that what the circumstances might look like if, in fact, there were no documents confirming interplanetary spacecraft. The very notion of no hidden, damning UFO documents continues today to be considered by many to be simply outside the realm of possibility. Perhaps in some instances, like the case of MJ-12, some guys just decided to make their own so-called government documents. It's not as if there wasn't a demographic fully primed and eager to believe the batch of papers was authentic.
Thank
Later
you,
in 50
Steve. Thank
Sure.
you. Yeah, I think we'll just wrap it up there probably. But any thoughts on any of that?
Isn't it amazing how it's still exactly the same today with these new document releases? It's the ones we got so far, they're no good. The ones that are coming are going to have the juicy bits that we really want. Just wait for the next batch, guys. And it won't happen in the next batch. And it'll become wait for the next batch. And it's still the exact same thing going on.
Yeah, I think it's really amazing to me, just like how influential Keyhoe, what I don't know, it continues to be amazing to me how influential Keyhoe is. Like he's kind of like I feel like he's um like Paul or something. I don't know, he's just really good at spreading the word. Like spreading the word, that's not the right phrase. What I mean is he's really good at getting people to believe things, and and he's really succeeded. You can really see that.
Yes, as I've said ad infinitum, he was a talented PR man. He was good at that. We're still talking about him and the organization represented. Yeah, he was good at that. He got politicians to open and read his letters. He got them to write him back. He got directors of intelligence agencies to pay attention to him. I wonder what really drove him. I really do.
What's fascinating too, I think, is that, it could be that, he believes this stuff, but in any case, that conviction, that emotional conviction, I think that's really what draws a lot of people in, because they're like, well, this is important, you know. Um, yeah, it's crazy.
It is an emotional conviction. He obviously wasn't money motivated, that you might think would have been the case when he was writing these sensational stories for pulp magazines. You'd have thought he just wants to pick up a couple dollars for a few hundred words or something. And like how the FBI file that we reviewed showed that he had an article published in Cosmopolitan where he accused the FBI of being aware of a Hitler Nazi plan to overtake the merchant marines, and the FBI didn't act on their knowledge of it. And we could see in the FBI memo that they called Keyhoe's accusation a complete fabrication or something to that effect. That kind of gave the impression that he was money motivated or a scammer. But if he wasn't a knowing intelligence community asset, his activity with NICAP would suggest it was emotionally driven. Yes. And to bring the thought full circle, that's what my disclaimer is usually about. And that the reason oftentimes that UFO interested people, that includes me, I'm among them, the reason they can't compartmentalize Keyhoe and NICAP and the MJ-12 and one circumstance or another, they're arguing from an emotional perspective that it's about their personal experience, and that I'm or a writer is attacking their legitimacy and their authenticity and their ability to assess what they saw when I'm writing about Donald Keyhoe. And that's what I mean exactly, Rachel, when I say I'd really like to know what drove him. I'd like to know more about his childhood, about what happened to him as a teenager. I don't know, because he sure appears to have got emotionally invested in the argument that lacked rationality to a certain extent. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's really my main point, is I think that that emotional appeals, while from the perspective of formal logic, is fallacious, right? From the perspective of your everyday person, most people are more convinced by emotional appeals, I think, than just by facts and information.
I see this in discussions online too. I think there's people who aren't actually interested in truth. They want to be right. And it kind of feels like he wanted to just be right in his inclination of whatever he investigated. When Ken Purdy, the editor-in-chief, hired him to investigate, he pretty much decided that he saw something, heard something this was it, and no other flavor of truth is right but this one, which is why he said experiences are garbage. This is why he said that's what it seems to be. I don't know what you guys think about that.
I agree. No, you nailed it, because I was going to say there's like a righteousness there in his commitment, and like you said, I think we see it in the community a lot. There's such a I can't, it's not like righteous indignation, but there's just like a righteous commitment almost to, I know what this is. I understand it, and I'm gonna bring it out. I'm gonna make it known. Yeah, no, you think you nailed it there.
And some cost fallacy too. Like, I've invested so much, I can't just give this up, or I'm gonna, that's my livelihood, or that's, my reputation or whatever.
Absolutely. That's sunken cost fallacy is a big part of it. So is arguing for the sake of argument. Yeah, yeah, you will see that online, that you'll be like, dude, just say I hadn't read it before I commented. Just admit it. Everybody knows. You're still trying to, 3 days later, you're still trying to argue the point. Yeah.
Well, I think it would help everyone. Like, I think it would help the world a lot if people were just a lot less attached to their beliefs. I think, if you were just like, well, that's what my opinion is now, but maybe it'll change. Like, we'd all be a lot, people would get along better. Conversations would just be so much easier. But also, you're not going to be disappointed, if you have this belief that you've been holding on to for so long and putting so much, investing so much in, that when you find out it's true, it's not going to like collapse your entire way of life.
Yes, these issues of emotional intelligence and why we do the things we do, really drew me further into this. It was a big reason that I wrote The Grays Have Been Framed, was because I saw people looking for help and they didn't identify whether they were looking for emotional support or objective investigation. And they're two different circumstances, they're different skill sets. And worst of all, the people claiming to be able to provide it, like aspects of the Mutual UFO Network, independents like Bud Hopkins and David Jacobs, would claim to be doing both at the same time, when that's just not possible. You know, that like I would invite people to consider interview a qualified professional therapist for quality emotional support and healing from traumatic experiences, and interview an investigator for quality, objective, professional investigation, and identify what you want and identify what your recourse is if they renege on it, and don't go for any of this UFO investigator that's trying to that refers to his cases as clients, you know, as if they're a therapy client. But yeah, Rachel, that's what really motivated me to write The Grays Have Been Framed, was those issues. Yes. Any closing thoughts, folks?
Yeah, I was just gonna say about Keyhoe. Now, he may have had, you know, all these reasons like emotional attachments and whatnot that, you know, he did what he did, but people don't always do things for one specific reason. You know, maybe what do we? I mean, what do we really know about the financials? We know he wasn't good with NICAP financials, and he didn't take money from NICAP when, you know, many times. But he had best-selling books that did extremely well, many of them, including like at least one that was optioned into that movie docudrama. Like, so he had to have been making at least some sort of reasonable financial income on a personal level, not to mention speaking engagements and other things that he was doing like on the side. So, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if there was at least some financial motive there as well. I don't know how much money he was making on those, but considering how popular his books were and still are to this day, I would have thought he at least was doing okay financially, personally.
That's a good point.
I just wanted to say I also interviewed Steph Quick a couple of weeks ago, so I would encourage people to check out that interview. I was basically kind of exploring the topic of migraines with her because you know I've talked with Jeff about this and her about it in the past, but I just kind of wanted to do an interview about migraines specifically, and we kind of talk about the relationship and, well, really mostly the lack of a relationship between migraines and like para weird or anomalous experiences. But there's some overlap there that's pretty interesting. And she also talks a bit about seizures, Lyme disease, which I know Allison was writing about recently. So I thought it was a really fun interview, and Steph talked about some really interesting stuff.
Thank you. And we can find that on UFO Sunset as well.
That's right. Thank you.
Thank you. Sharon.
When you were talking about how conversations about Keyhoe have gone on and on and on. And I thought, can you imagine if he appeared back on the earth right now and said, "What is this? Who are these people on this screen? And why are they talking about me?"
Yeah,
Actually,
he'd have a number of reactions about what did and didn't come to pass. What were you going to say, Jeff?
I was just going to say, I was actually just thinking about this earlier from kind of a different level, as what Keyhoe would think about some of the claims that some of the disclosure activists are making now, since he wasn't into contactees and some of that more woo side of things. Whereas now, like the whole psychic contact and C5 and all this kind of woo stuff has become mainstream to kind of this whole disclosure movement that he started. And I just kind of wondered what he would have thought about like that, you know?
I know it's coming up
Yeah,
in the book, but his wrestling with the Betty and Barney Hill story is that's kind of where the wires crossed of like, oh, this is wooey for us at NICAP. What do we do with this? You know?
indeed.
Well, but then when
Yes.
it came to the Joe Simonton pancake case in 1961, NICAP
My favorite
famously,
one.
yeah, they did not want to analyze it. Like, you want us to put up hundreds of dollars to test a pancake from a contactee? Nah, we don't do that here. We don't do the contactee. Eventually, a guy with NICAP ended up, who is a lab analyst, ended up doing the test, and I think he tried to get money out of NICAP later, like $300 something, and I don't think it ever happened. I don't think anybody paid him for his lab work. But yeah, even in the 60s, NICAP really didn't want anything to do with that. And when it came to abductions, like when the Hill case broke, they were kind of iffy at first. Of course, the first report was written by NICAP investigator Walter Webb, but yeah, that was kind of before that. They didn't want to touch anything that involved humanoids or beings or contacts with beings. They keep that away from NICAP with a 10-foot pole.
That was communist stuff.
Yeah.
Yes, there's a whole thing, as I'm sure you're aware, Brian, and others of FBI had a definite interest in contactees about where are these stories coming from, that, you know, they're basically anti-government, you know, anti-capitalist, anti-nuclear weapons. And then it just gets crazy that like peace activism becomes synonymous with subversity. America, huh?
What a
Speaking
country.
of, I can't believe none of us had thought about this when we were talking in the beginning about, you know, this week's events, but the CIA, what's he from the Directorate of Science and Technology employee that was recently found with like 40 million in gold bars and a couple million in cash in his house.
Yeah,
Just
yeah. I'd like an explanation on how the CIA, like I can envision why. I'm not sure I support it, but I can envision why they would have access or hold that kind of gold and cash. I would like a more thorough description of how it gets signed for and taken out of a facility, though. Because like the fact one guy that wasn't vetted well could pull this off kind of suggests like how many dozens of people check out millions in gold bars a week, you know? Yeah, and we're back to that big wide leeway in operations that someone's running at their discretion, you know? Yeah.
That's the
yes.
particularly thing about this story is this. It's not just the fact that some guy at the CIA can apparently send a memo for 40 million gold bars and actually get the bars. It's that this guy got hired by the CIA and his background entire front. He didn't have any of his degrees. He was never a pilot in the Navy. Guy had security clearance, and that makes zero sense. How the CIA could hire a guy, put him in a high-level position enough so that he could get 40 million in gold with an entirely background. How does that work? Because we know the process of getting a security clearance is intense and difficult and, you know, exhaustive. Like, they would have turned that up almost immediately. So what's going on with this guy? Like, what's going on with this whole story?
I agree. There's a lot of questions to be answered there. Another thing, what I thought you were going to say, Stephen, was one of those quote unquote missing scientists seems to have been found. I've only seen it from a couple of unreliable media accounts so far, but it seems that one of the females was found in a nature reserve, a national park, deceased. So there should be more coming out about that. My general take on it is I feel like the whole connecting people is kind of sensationalized. But I admittedly haven't really delved into it enough to know. I just kind of feel like if she met foul play or if she harmed herself or whatever the facts may eventually show about this circumstance, we should systematically go about deciding what it may or may not indicate about any other circumstance, which, you know, more often than not is little to nothing, but we'll wait and see.
Well, this was the lady that wasn't even a scientist. She was an administrative assistant at Los Alamos. And she's the one that her family had thought that she had abandoned them a year ago or whatever it was, because they were having problems and money problems and stuff like that. And they thought that she had just taken off and left them. And it turns out she was found in the middle of nowhere with a gun next to her. You know, almost certainly she shot herself and killed herself like a year ago. And they just found the body recently. But that was one of the cases that to me was one of the most spurious connections to the whole missing scientist thing, because she wasn't a scientist. Like, she was just an assistant at Los Alamos to some, I don't know, someone else. So,
yeah, like we've discussed with these things, you need a wide sample to, like, before you can identify something as weird, you need to know, like, how many people work at Los Alamos, like how many thousands of people, and what percentage just leave their families per decade, and then compare that to the general population and so on and so forth. And, you know, really identify how weird is something rather than just having Daily Beast tell you it's weird. Yeah.
you need to know the base rate at which these events normally occur in such a demographic population. Otherwise, it's not weird. And as people like Mick West even calculated out a bunch of math on the base rates of, and we'd actually expect to see orders of magnitude more than they've attached, you know, to the missing scientist story. Really, there should be thousands of people on this list, not 12 or 13 or whatever, just based on the normal base rate of people that go missing or murdered or die or, you know, whatever in these populations. Because in reality, there's something like 2 million people with like a like a security clearance in the United States. Like, it's not, you know, a small amount of people that, you know, for example, have security clearances. There's millions of them. If you break it down to like the wider like aerospace industry, how many people work in these industries, it's many, many, many millions. And so you start to get like really spurious connections as to how are these people really connected in any way? And no, not really.
Interesting. Thank you.
And it's been an interesting, like a lot of these things, it's an interesting glimpse into humanity, I think, and just us as human beings. And, you know, a lot of times we see the families, you know, speaking out and, you know, wanting their privacy respected, and they've already had a very difficult thing to deal with. And now they have their family member in the news and stuff. But at the same time, we've also seen some families that are embracing the narrative, because they don't want to think of the possibility that their loved one or their child committed suicide, stuff like that. So so much insight for humanity as usual in these things.
There's another project to be done, isn't it? I mean, listing these different people and finding out what their friends and loved ones say would be a whole nother project. Any closing comments?
Trust no one.
Well, thank you all for joining me. Thank you, Brian. I hope you enjoyed yourself. We're glad you joined us. I'm Jack Brewer with Expanding Frontiers Research. Visit us at expandingfrontiersresearch.org. You can also browse our Patreon, where you'll find more resources and interesting content, and find that and other useful links in the YouTube video description. Thanks again for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
See you, everybody.